Islam.
Islam.
First, I rise to my highest height, giving all perfect praise to Allah. Extend those honors to all true divine prophets, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and Confucius, and our prophet in these days and times, Lord, you are me. I am Muhammad Honeycutt Islam. Islam, Moors.
Islam.
All is well.
All is well.
So we're going to go a little bit into a little bit of history and a little bit of law. And we're going to see how this pertains to, we're going to see how everything pertains to. So, what kind of flag is the Moorish flag? There's a red flag with 500 green star in the center. So, there's an emphasis on color.
That's right.
Right? So what do these colors mean? We have to understand that in which we propagate, or that which we stand on. Right? So, you have the Quran open? Can you go to Surah 3, verse 3, please? So we're going to go in a little bit into the record. We're going to go into the scriptures and see how this ties in. Now, we Muslims, are we not?
Islam.
So we're ones of peace.
That's right.
So what it says on the back of our 101s? Right? Because this is where we divide our authority.
Authorities.
Right.
Because are we just a civic organization? No. Are we just a religious corporation? No. We're a religious and civic organization.
That's right.
And we have a theocracy. So this is where we get our power from. It's on this document that's on the back of your 101s.
Wow.
So, this states, the Moorish Science of America do solemnly swear that the meeting of the members of Noble Dra Ali, Millie Ill, Small Bay, Lovett Bay, and Foreman Bay, the Moorish Science of America deriving its power and authority from the great Quran of Muhammad to propagate the faith and extend the learning and truth of the great prophet of Ali in America. So this is where we derive our authority. Is it not?
Islam.
Right. Islam. So let's see how this relates to that flag. Can you read that verse more?
Surah 3, verse Ayah 3. It is he who sent down to thee, step by step, in truth, the book, confirming that went before it. And he sent down the law of Moses and the gospel of Jesus before this as a guide to mankind. And he sent down the criterion of judgment between right and wrong.
Islam. So these two books that is being speak of is in Arabic we call the Torah, what is known as the Torah, which is the first 5 books in the Holy Bible.
That's right.
Then you have what was mentioned, which is called the Injil, which is a singular book that is pertaining to the prophet Jesus. Can you go into Exodus 28:17? So now that we went to our authority, we went into the book that we derive our authority from. So now we're going into a book that was mentioned in the book where we derive our authority from. So from our Moorish questionnaire, we go into the Quran of Muhammad, or the Quran of Mecca. Now we're going into the Torah, which is your first 5 books of the Holy Bible.
28:17.
Yes.
Then mount 4 rows of precious stones on it. In the first row there will be a ruby, a topaz, and a beryl.
Islam. Stop. So what this is speaking of is something called the ephod. And this is worn by the high priest of the Levites. The Levites are the head priests in the congregation of Israel. Now it mentioned ruby. What color is ruby?
Red.
Red. Okay. Continue reading.
In the second row, a turquoise, a sapphire, and an emerald. In the third row,
Stop right there. An emerald. What color is emerald?
Green.
Green. So, when you read the Quran, you understand that green is a color of peace.
Wow.
When it talks about those who are in heaven, it talks about how they're clothed in green. When you look up in history, Muhammad's turban, it's in green. When you study the Islamic order that was in Africa, in the area of Timbuktu, those people who had authority wore a green fez. So now we're going back in the time and seeing how this relates in culture. So, this color green, this emerald, right?
That's right.
Where was Jesus born?
In Bethlehem,
in
Judah, in the house of David.
And the ephod, emerald, represents Judah.
Islam.
But red represents Levi.
Islam.
So you come from a delineation of nothing but kings, high priests, and rulers, and you come through the direct bloodline of Jesus. Islam?
Islam.
Islam.
Work. Right.
So, now that we have somewhat understanding of how old our authority and our laws go back, we're going to bring it more to present day. Because what happened between 1779 and 1865? This was during the time of slavery, was it not?
Islam.
All right. So some people will also call this time Reconstruction era. So how did this happen? How did things begin to become reconstructed? What laws was passed? Who was the presidency? What was the Congress? If you say that you have gotten freedom, or you understand laws, or you know your rights, then you should know the delineation of time in which you receive and adhere to those rights. Islam.
Islam.
So we are taught that the 13th Amendment ended slavery. Did it not?
Islam.
All right. So who was president at that time?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. All right. So November 7th, 1860, Lincoln is nominated as president. And March 4th, 1861, Lincoln took the presidential oath of office. Now, this is 1861. Now you're starting to go into the year where a lot of this legislation started to come about. You have 4 proclamations that was made during this time.
Work.
So you have the Emancipation Proclamation, September 22nd, 1862. Islam Moore, can you get that for me? Thank you, Moore. You have the Compensated Emancipation, which is December 1st, 1862, followed by the Supplemental Emancipation, January 1st, 1863. Then you have the Open Amnesty and Reconstruction, December 8th, 1863. So these 4 proclamations all brought a remedy to a problem in the country at that time. The Emancipation Proclamation, this dealt with actually working towards the freedom and liberties given to those who was denied that liberty. Those who were so-called Negroes, black, colors, Ethiopians, etc.
That's right.
Then you have the Compensated Emancipation. This was a pecuniary aid from the presidential office to help those who was enslaved at this time. Then you have the Supplemental. This was to grant you the ability to be sustainable. This is what let you colonize certain areas. This is what gave you the ability to have things like the Freedmen's Bureau, so on and so forth. Now, he was reelected in 1864. He beat his former general. That former general was General George McClellan. General George McClellan was the first head officer for the North. Everybody remembers Grant, but Grant he replaced George McClellan because when you look at the Civil War, even though the North won, for 3/4 of the war, they was losing. And this was due to the leadership of McClellan. They didn't start to begin the war until he was replaced and Grant was put in his place. Islam, do you have that? Islam, this more is about to read Section 9 of the Emancipation Proclamation, and we're going to disseminate and break this down. Islam.
Islam.
And be it further enacted that all slaves of persons who shall hereafter be engaged in rebellion against the government of the United States, or who shall in any way give aid or comfort thereto, escaping from such persons and taking refuge within the lines of the army, and all slaves captured from such persons or deserted by the and coming under the control of the government of the United States, and all slaves of such persons found on or being within any place occupied by rebel forces and afterwards occupied by the forces of the United States shall be deemed captives of war and shall be forever free of their servitude and not again held slaves.
Islam. So, as the document states, thank you, Lord, that these people will become forever free and never again held as slaves. So how is it in 2019, the 13th Amendment, with its 2 sections, allows for involuntary servitude unless it's for a crime. Is that not a contradiction?
Islam.
Islam. So, let's dig a little bit deeper into this 13th Amendment. Now, if you were to take your time and actually research the timing of the passing of this document by its dates, you will see, according to the congressional record of that time, that the 13th Amendment with 20 sections is indeed the document that passed. And if you was to do further research during that time, you could actually understand that the 13th Amendment with 2 sections was vetoed. But you have to study that record. Matter of fact, do you have the Northwest Ordinance on you? And you can see where the language of the 13th Amendment with 2 sections originated.
Islam.
So let's go to the dates dealing with the 13th Amendment. Just so we can be clear. All right. The 13th Amendment passed in Congress April 8th, 1864. It preceded January 31st, 1865. This is when it passed in the House. December 6th, 1865, it was ratified. On December 18th, 1865, Secretary of State William H. Seward proclaimed its adoption. So this is when it became a document and it became law. See, there's stages to this. You have to first pass through 2 different houses, and then Congress then goes that into law, and then it's entered into law. So you can see that the 13th Amendment at that time, with its 20 sections, did pass. It is a legal law that went through all the channels that it needs to pass. Now, when you read the 5th Amendment, when you read the 5th article, it talks about how to pass. You need 2/3 of the several states for this to become law. At that time, the Union States, 1861 to 1863, was 34 states. Then, between 1863 and 1863, it was 35 states. So you have one more state. This was ratified the 13th Amendment was ratified December 6, 1865. All right? So we're going to deal with 1865. So by the time 1865 came, there was 36 Union states. What's 13 plus 13?
26.
26, right? And another 13 is 39, correct?
Islam.
Islam. So what's 12? What's 36 divided by 12? 3.
Islam.
Islam. So if you have 24 states, that's 2/3 of the several states. That means this law becomes passed. Okay. So let's run the states down so we could prove and make knowledge born. This is not something that anything that I profess is not something for you to believe. It's for you to take, understand, belief, faith, then fruition.
Islam.
Islam. So let's read off the states. Now all we need is 24, correct?
That's right.
New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Vermont, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Maine, Michigan, Iowa, Wisconsin, California, Minnesota, Oregon, Kansas, Nevada, Delaware, Georgia, Maryland, South Carolina, Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana. So this was passed by 2/3 of the several states. Islam?
Islam.
So this is the law that ended slavery. This was the law that was able to bring remedy to the Union during this time of civil war, where the legislature could not convene. Islam?
Islam.
So let's go into the 13th Amendment with its 20 sections and break down some of the hereditaments and birthrights that is contained within it. Islam?
Islam.
Okay. So you have section 1. It states all persons shall have the right to peacefully to assemble and worship God according to the dictate of their own conscience. This means that you have the ability to worship God freely. Because how did our people accept Christianity?
Forced.
It was beaten into them. It was by force. These people was not Christians prior to slavery. where they had to be enslaved by Christian black codes, just going back to 1724,
That's right.
or having certain freedoms because they were Christian slaves. These people was Muslims.
Islam.
Islam. So now you are able to, once again, worship the Most High, the Allah, Father of the universe. Islam.
Islam.
Section 2. The use of the public press shall not be obscured. That means you're able to make your own literature. Islam.
Islam.
So, we have a press today, right?
That's right.
So, what is the law that is able to make that possible? It's the First Amendment.
That's
But
right.
Freedom of
these
press.
people at this time did not have that right. So this right had to be secured and conveyed.
That's right.
So the best way to do that is on a federal level. And this is why we have the 13th Amendment with its 20 sections. This is what allowed these people who was robbed of this right to be able to take part in this right. So this very document right here, this Moorish literature, we would not have been able to produce if we didn't have the freedom to produce it. Because there was a point in time when we wasn't able to produce our own literature, let alone read. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. So you see the importance of these laws. See, we're comfortable today. We take this for granted, but this wasn't always how it was. A lot of people died. A lot of people fought. So you could be comfortable today.
Islam.
And this is why we need to take this comfortability and make sure we secure it for the next generations. Not leave them the hells and the cares of the world that we will have to be born into and overcome.
That's right, Muslim.
Islam. So we're going to section 3. Islam. The right of citizens to free and lawful speech in public assembly shall not be denied. Okay, so this is 1865. What are we doing right now, Moses? Islam? Islam. Are we not peacefully assembled?
That's right.
Are we not propagating our own thoughts and ideas?
Islam.
Islam. So, but there's a period. So there's another thought or idea being conveyed in this portion of the literature for you to understand. Access of citizens to the ballot box shall not be obscured either by civil or military power. So, your first responders, your police officers, your firemen, your ambulance, which is a part of the fire department. But these are your first responders. These are your civil powers. So, there is no need for the 15th Amendment when it comes to voting rights when you already have this secured.
Islam.
Islam.
Teaching.
So, when you go and you vote, you see that there's an officer there. Does he stop you at the door? No, because this is a hereditament. This is a birthright that you have.
Islam.
Now, even though that you may use it under a law that's unright, this law was already secured for you. This is why we're going back to Islam. We're going back to the old-time religion. We're reverting away from this craziness and going and searching for peace. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. The military shall always be subordinate to the existing judicial authority over citizens. The privilege of writ of habeas corpus shall never be suspended in the presence of the judicial authority. Islam. Doesn't that word habeas corpus sound familiar?
Islam.
Islam. So it comes from out of the Constitution. What does habeas corpus mean? It means the right of the body. This is dealing with the detainment of someone. So now you cannot be detained and abused offensively. You have the right to a speedy trial. You have the right for your problem to be heard and judged upon instead of rotting in the jail and waiting for your destiny to be bestowed to.
So we can't throw you in Rikers for 3 years for nothing?
Islam.
Okay.
Section 4. The militia of the state or of the United States shall not be employed to invade the lawful rights of the people of any of the several states. But the United States shall not be hereby deprived of the right and power to defend and protect its property and rights within the limits of any of the states. That's a lot to be said. So let's break this down. So basically, the military doesn't have the right to abuse you. But the military does have the right to protect you or to defend you with any manner of force that is needed to protect the citizens or property. So let's look at this from our municipality. Correct? So if there's an attack on a certain area of Brooklyn, let's say Clinton Hill, the military has the right to come in, shut things down, and protect us from whatever harm. But the military does not have the right to come and abuse us while this is going on. So there's a check and balances being given between these powers. So basically, like Sheikh Amir Talib said, when Moors asked, where's your army? Marines, the Army, the Navy, Air Force, Homeland Security. This is your army. Are you not a citizen of the United States of America?
Islam.
Islam. Are we not impartial of the said government?
Islam.
Islam. So, with that citizenship, you have certain protections, and this is one of the protections that you are given. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. So now, we're going to go into section 5. We're going to break these down so it can be understood that this is not a slave document.
Go ahead.
You understand? That there's actually powers that not only remedy slavery, but also gives you the provisions to start a nation and to become a part of the union. But you have to understand the lettering of the law so you can understand how to employ it, how to use it.
Make it plain, Mo.
Make it plain, Mo Islam. Section 5. Persons held to service or labor for life in any state under the laws thereof may be taken into any territory of the United States, south or north, latitude 30, and the right to such service or labor shall not be impaired thereby, and the tutorial legislator thereof shall not be impaired thereby. So this is dealing with, within a certain area, there's a certain governance that you have to have with the running away of property or slaves that you have to deal with. But there's a prescribed way to deal with it. Let me continue on. And the territorial legislator thereof shall not be impaired thereby, and the territorial legislator thereof shall have the executive right to make and shall make all needful rules and regulations for the protection of such right and also for the protection of such persons. So, during the time that this law was being passed, you had something that you had called free states, and then you have states that you had slave states. This is why the demarcation line of the 30-30 was very important, because some slaves, or if you want to look at it from a legal standpoint, some persons of property, second-class citizens, would escape the jurisdiction that it was legal to have a slave, and they would have to be remanded back. But this was only during that time, and there was a point where this came to a close, but they had to deal with it at that time. So there was prescribed rules and regulations on how to deal with that problem. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. So now we're going to go to section 6. Wait, let me finish section 5. But Congress or any territory legislator shall not have power to impair or abolish such rights of servitude in the said territory while in a territorial condition without the consent of the states, such south of said latitude which maintain such service. So when we think of the United States, we think of from Maine to California, but this wasn't so. Like I said, there was only 36 states at this time. So when it came to certain territories, these territories or these legal bodies wasn't necessarily a part of the union, but they was Islam. So they had to have certain ways to govern with the governance of property, and this is what that speaks to. Islam?
Islam.
Section 6. Involuntary servitude is set for a crime shall not be permanently established within the district. Islam, y'all understand what that's meaning? Let me read this again. Involuntary servitude is set for a crime shall not be permanently established. That means if you commit a crime, you can be detained, but it's not something that will be perpetual. You cannot be permanently detained for a crime. This is what is known as paying your debt to society. Once your debt to society is paid, then you are free. This is not a revolving reciprocal door of banishment or punishment, or to leave you with certain statuses from coming out of this status that will leave you impeded in society, such as what is known as a felony charge.
Islam.
Islam. Islam. Set apart for the seat of government of the United States, but the right of sojourn in such district, with persons held to service or labor for life, shall not be denied. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. So people have the ability to, the right to sojourn in such district with persons held of service or labor alike. So after you finish your debt, you were able to start anew somewhere else. Section 7. When any territory of the United States south of north latitude 3630 shall have a population equal to the ratio of representation for one member of Congress. Islam, I got your constitution? Need you for the article. So, this is stating in the enumeration for Congress. So, if you're able to set up, I need this for a second. So, if you have the authority to set up a government and you have members that enumerate 30,000, then you can petition to be a part of the union as a state, and you will have representation in Congress. It takes 30,000 members in order for you to have representation in Congress. This is how you take your state, being a partial of the said government, and now you have a nation in which you can operate freely.
Nation
Islam?
state. That's what they mean by nation state?
Nation state.
Islam.
So, is this impossible? No.
No.
If you study the Vatican, they incorporated in Italy in 1929.
Islam.
When you study the Arabian Peninsula, there's a reason why they call it Saudi Arabia, because through religious laws they was able to incorporate that government. You ever heard of Syria, Iraq, Iran? Well, you have a treaty that dates back to 1927 that led those areas to become governments. We now have our own legal legislation. We also have our own authority where we can do this here in America. So as you can see, little Italies, or you can see Chinatowns and little Koreas, these people who have some type of legal representation, with representation in Congress, so they can have an area to populate. Islam? Then the Prophet said Moors live together?
Islam.
Islam? So how are you going to do that legally?
Through the
This is the
Moorish
law.
Temple. Yeah, Moorish Temple of America.
Moorish Temple of America.
That's right.
It may have temple in its name, but it has an operation of a house.
Islam.
The house of David, bringing it back to the beginning of the demonstration. Where was Jesus born? In
Bethlehem, Judah, in the house of David.
So this is why we have to propagate this faith, build this house, so it can secure our house. With these lessons, Moors, you can get your house in order.
Islam.
Give me 1 second, Moors.
Look where it says 30,000.
Yeah, Islam.
I believe that's when the Congress, what's allowed by Congress.
It's got a lot of extra comments. Islam, while he look for that, I want to continue to break this in. But in this section 1 of the United States of America's Constitution, it speaks about how many people you need for representation of Congress, this being 30,000. This is why this 30,000 is again being represented or being spoken of in this document of law. Islam?
Islam.
It shall be admitted as a state into the Union on equal footing with the other states. So, the Moorish Temple of America, this Moorish Divine and National Movement, it will be on the same footing as New York State. It will be on the same footing as California State. It will be on the same footing as the rest of the 48 continental states. Islam? So now you have what you would call state powers. And every state has a constitution in which it operates itself under. If you look up this state, you have a state constitution. Now, the states make up the union. So if you want to influence the legislation of the union, you can do it as a state, especially with representation in Congress. So when you need certain bills passed for the benefit of your state, you have the political power too. Now when it comes to voting, it's not like, oh, who's on the ballot? Oh, let me just vote. Oh, what's the case? Islam, can you read nothing?
The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least one representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3.
What article is that?
Islam.
Article.
Article 1. Which section?
Section 3.
Article 1, Section 3. So, for every 30,000, you get a representation for your state. So, do you have 30,000 so-called black people in America?
Islam.
Islam? There's more than 30,000, right?
That's right.
So, will you say there's more than 1 million so-called black people in America?
I will.
All right, so 3 times 3 is what? 9. So if you wanted 3 members of Congress, right? Out of all the representatives, you would need 90,000 people. There's more than 1 million so-called blacks. So with these people proclaiming their nationality and being conveyed a proper political status, you're going to have more than enough representation in Congress to have whatever bill that you need passed.
Islam.
Islam is now you start to build up the probability in which you can have laws passed. But if you have no representation in Congress, this is not possible. Islam?
Islam.
That's right.
Islam. So when you go back to October 15th, right, 1928, there's a convention going on.
That's right.
Is it not?
Islam.
So our political and religious leader had certain members attend this function. In that convention, you had a man there by the name of Oscar the Priest. Islam, who was a congressional member. He was helped put in office by the members of the Moorish Science Temple of America.
That's right.
So we have to recreate the will. This is not something that can't be done. This is not some high, grandiose idea that can only be attained through the shining light and somebody coming out the sky. No, this has been done already by your ancestors, by the leaders of your temple. Because every sheikh in our temple, every grand sheikh in the line of our temple is sent right back to the prophet.
Islam.
Islam.
That's right.
So you're sitting in the house and where men are built up to be independent, upright, independent, and fearless.
That's right.
So that's what you have to do. So we don't need excuses, we need work. You have
Islam.
to put the work in to get the hereditament. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. Okay, Islam. And the people may, in such constitution, Islam, the divine constitution and bylaws. So you have the legal documents in which it is to appease this section of this law and become a political power. Islam.
Islam.
Either prohibit or sustain the right to involuntary labor or service, and alter or amend the Constitution at their will. All right? So, do we have that ability according to our divine Constitution?
Islam.
Bylaws?
Islam.
All right, so let's read Section 3.
Go ahead.
It states, love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice must be proclaimed and practiced by all members of the Moorish Science Temple of America. No member is put in danger or accused falsely his brother or sister on any occasion at all that may harm his brother or sister, because Allah
Is love. So,
Islam.
you think we're going to be having slavery, the abusement of people, even though we have the will to or not to do it? You really think that's what people stand on? Islam?
Islam.
What is a covenant, Moors? What does the word
Contract.
covenant mean?
Contract.
Right? So, can you get on chapter 25? We have a certain contract that we are upheld to,
Islam.
as well as a constitution of laws that we are held to. Right?
Yea, all the children.
Ye are the children
That
of one Father, provided by his care,
and
and the breath from
that
one
one
mother
brother
hath given you
to
suck.
suck.
Let the bonds of affection unite thee with thy brothers, that peace and happiness may dwell in thy Father's house. And when ye separate in the world, remember the relation that bindeth you to love and unity. Islam?
Islam.
Got it. Go ahead.
Unity and prefer not a stranger before thine own blood.
Now, this is the verse I want you to pay attention to. Because there's brothers in this room, there's sisters in this room.
Islam.
Right? So we're supposed to conduct ourselves nationally, right? So
Islam.
how do we deal with each other? Islam?
Islam.
If thy brother is in
Adversity.
sister, if thy
The
Sisters in trouble, forsake her not.
Islam? Is these not
Islam.
principles you would want to govern yourself by?
That's right.
So you don't have to learn thousands of pages of code and hundreds of pages of law. This is a very simple religion, isn't it?
Islam.
What does Islam mean?
Peace.
Islam simply means peace.
Make it plain, Mo.
Islam, it's
Make
not
it plain.
complicated to understand. You don't gotta go dig up a treaty from 200 years ago and talk a bunch of Latin and nah. Be yourself. Be one of peace. The laws is already laid. Enforce the Constitution to what? Save the nation. Islam. This is what the Prophet taught us, isn't that?
Islam.
Islam. How much time I got, Master?
2:35.
Oh no. Oh. Okay, yeah, big brothers. You see what your big brothers do? Islam.
Get your hand out my pocket, Mo.
Islam. Section 8. The present right of representation in Section 2, Article 1 of the Constitution. Islam. Hold on one second, Mo. Yeah, you gotta hear all them laws, Mo. You pay your dues, Master.
All the time.
There's two things certain in life: death and taxes. No, excuse me. Islam.
Need finances
Islam.
to uplift the nations.
Yeah, it takes finance to save the nation. Islam.
Islam.
The present right of representation in Section 2, Article 1 of this Constitution shall not be altered without the consent of all the states, maintaining the right to involuntary servitude or labor south of latitude 3630. But not so. All that mathematics and sophisticated talk, it means the South.
Islam.
Make it plain.
Make it plain,
If
Mo.
you South, if you was part of the Confederate and you like the slavery, this is appointed to you. That's what that means. Islam. But nothing in this Constitution or its amendment shall be construed to deprive any state south of said latitude 3630 of the right of abolishing involuntary servitude at its will. Now, this is 2019, right? And slavery been ended since 1865, right? So
Islam.
that's over 100 years, supposedly. But it's supposed to end at least 100 years ago, right?
Yep.
So it says you have at will to pass this legislation, right? So why did Massachusetts just recently signed
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
on the
Yep.
13th Amendment?
Yep. Just now. They
Just
just.
now,
Yep.
this year.
Yep.
And it wasn't the 13th Amendment with two sections that it passed on. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. So as you can see, states have certain powers granted to them that they can use through the federal government. So join with your brothers and sisters, become a state so you can influence law how you see fit. Because we're not here to propagate and clap our hands and dance and sing and praise Allah and dress up and look nice. No, we got business to attend to. Islam? Jesus came for what? Israel. Was he playing? No, he was kicking over tables, whipping people, challenging doctors of the law since he was 12 years old. Read it in the book of Matthew.
That's right.
What did Judah do? Judah went out with his brothers and sisters and secured the land. Did they not?
Islam.
So what is Muhammad called in our one-on-ones? The conqueror.
Conqueror.
Did he not go out, set against Satan? When was the head of Satan taken?
1453 Byzantine.
By whom?
By Muhammad.
So there was wars being taken place. As it was once said, freedom ain't free, Moses.
That's right.
Islam. So we got to put this work in. And isn't it easier to put this work in when you are with your brother in arms?
Islam.
Islam.
Remember the relations.
Islam. Now we're going to go to Section 9. The regulation and control of the right to labor or service in any of the states south of latitude 3630 servitude is hereby recognized to exclusively the right of each state within its own limits, and its constitution shall not be altered or amended to impair this right of each state without its consent. Provided this article shall not be construed to absolve the United States from rendering assistance to suppress insurrections and domestic violence when called upon by any state. So basically, to make this section clear, different states have different ways that they could culminate and deal with each other. But when it rises to a point where it's a violent situation, then the federal government and those federal powers underneath the executive branch can then step in and settle the problem without abusing either state. Islam?
Islam.
So basically, you got two little brothers fighting, big brother step in, he don't beat up the two little brothers, but he separate them. Islam?
Islam.
Section 10. No state shall pass any law in any way interfering with or obstructing the recovery of fugitives from justice or from labor or service, or any law of Congress made under Article 4, Section 2 of this Constitution, and all laws in violation of this section may, on complaint made by any person of the state, be declared void by the Supreme Court of the United States. So this section is basically saying that the Supreme Court has supreme power over all legislative judgments. And if there's a problem that cannot be settled in a civil court, state court, then it must be presented to the Supreme Court for its final judgment, unless it's appealed. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. Now, if you want to read this for yourself, because this is not some degree that's hidden away underneath a judge's chest and you gotta have secret hand signals and pay money and no. It's in a book called The Resurrection by Timothy Dingwell. You can receive this book online. It's a great book. This is written by Master Grand Resurrected Grand Sheikh Timothy Dingwell.
Islam.
As I stated earlier in this demonstration, I gave the dates of when the 13th Amendment was passed in the Senate, in the state, when it was ratified, and when it was adopted. You can go into the congressional record of that time and find it. Just study. Study, and study. And when you ask what to study next, study yourself. This law applies to you. Study yourself. Islam?
Islam.
Islam. Section 11. As a right of coming between the several states south of latitude 3630, the right of transit of persons held to involuntary labor or service from one state to another state shall not be obscured. But such persons shall not be brought into a state north of said latitude. So this is dealing with slavery dealings in the South. Like, listen, y'all could do that over there, but you better keep that over there.
That's right.
Basically, if that comes over here, then we all got a problem. So just looking at how the federal government is kind of like flexing its power to keep certain trades constrained in a certain area. Islam? Islam. So we could be a nation, right?
Islam.
We have the power to be a nation, right?
Islam.
That's right.
But most people worried about today, where that bread at? I'll get that money. I want that Benz. I want a bigger house.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we supposed to get like something like what they call it, reparations, right? We're supposed to be getting a check, right? Everybody seen Dave Chappelle. People get all type of KFC, big Cadillacs, big rims and chains, right?
Newport truck.
Get all the salvation where the money at, right? So wasn't the term persons used?
Yes.
Wasn't the term property used?
Islam.
Right? So there was an institution, as illegal as it was, or how unrighteous it was, but there was a trade going on. So when there's a trade, you have product. Someone produces that product, and someone manages that product. So you have people who are working. So a person that works, what do they get in return for their labor? Compensation. Did not these slaves work?
Islam.
They was beat on beds or in fields? In fields. Right? They was sleeping on cotton, or was they picking cotton? Picking cotton. So there was work being done.
That's right.
So if you put in work and you're not justly compensated, what are you looking for?
Compensation.
Compensation. So our ancestors at this time, who was held as property, produced product, assets. So they need to be compensated.
That's right.
So how does this law talk about compensating people? So let's go to section 17. Let's talk about the money now.
Islam.
Whenever any state wherein involuntary servitude is recognized or allowed, whenever any state wherein involuntary servitude is recognized or allowed shall propose to abolish such servitude. So, as I said, you had free states and you had slave states. So whenever these slave states would petition to no longer be a slave state, it was a bonus, it was an incentive, it was a financial incentive. So, let's go back and read that again. Whenever any state wherein involuntary servitude, slavery, involuntary servitude, slavery, just make that plain.
That's right.
Is recognized or allowed shall propose to abolish such servitude and shall apply for pecuniary assistance therein. The Congress may, in its discretion, grant such relief not exceeding $100 for each person liberated. So, we're looking for liberation, right?
Yeah.
Liberation, right? Fist in the air, all that, right? So, when it comes to this liberation, is a poor man free?
Poor man free.
Is a poor man free? Yeah,
Yeah.
he's free. He got freedoms, but he can't sustain himself.
Islam.
So that's not a certain quality of life in which is go along with the pursuit of love, happiness, freedom, certain liberties that's under human rights you naturally have. Islam?
Islam.
So you would need some type of financial enrichment in order to produce it for yourself. So a lot of people, their main goal is to acquire pecuniary aid, and due to their level of consciousness, some of them even want to go back to Africa, right? So what law do you have that's going to pay you, give you pecuniary aid, and allow you to go to Africa? Let's keep reading. Congress may, in its discretion, grant such relief not exceeding $100 for each person liberated, but Congress shall not propose such abolishment or relief to any state. Congress may assist free persons
Islam. Free.
of African descent to immigrate and colonize Africa. So wait a minute. What did I just say? Congress may assist free persons. What is a free person? Is this a citizen of a government? A first-class citizen in his proper status? What is his nationality? Moorish American. What is our nationality? Moorish American. Why? Because we're descendants of Moroccans born in America. Hold on, wait. Is that a descent nation? Congress may assist free persons of African descent to immigrate and colonize Africa.
That's right.
Islam?
Islam.
And this is a U.S. federal law, right? So by you being Moorish American, emphasis on the citizenship that comes from being an American citizen with a Moorish nationality and a Moorish descent, right?
Islam.
This law appeals to you. And then this, earlier in this section talk about a constitution.
Yeah.
Islam.
So is there anywhere in the constitution that gives us a descent nation? All right. Look over here.
Go ahead.
The Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites who inhabited the northwestern and southwestern shores of Asia, of Africa. Islam?
Islam.
So this law is directly in correlation with your divine constitutions and bylaws in which you have the authority as a theocracy to move as a government with representation in Congress. Islam?
Islam.
And you're able to receive pecuniary aid. Now, I know people don't like math. Oh, Lord, math. So it's time to deal with money. So, you about your brag, your Skrilla, your notes, your fiat, pecuniary notes, all this. So when you look up gold at that time, as it said $100, this $100 was backed by gold. This gold was equivalent to 3 ounces of gold per $100. How much is an ounce of gold today? Is $1,100. So you have 3 ounces of gold. That's 33,000. That's 3,300, right? So
you know, some people, they don't got real good financial standing. So you know when you don't pay a bill, it gets larger and larger and larger. Cable cutting your bill off in 1 month.
Islam.
So imagine if you have an interest on $3,300 for over 100 years. Islam, while y'all playing, get your check. And
Islam.
with that, I
Islam.
say peace.
Make it plain, Mo.